Steampunk, Cyberpunk, Deiselpunk, Decopunk, Solarpunk, Splatterpunk. Some of these you have almost definitely heard of. The majority of them, probably not. There are a lot of these things. It's kind of a thing to do. Take a word, add -punk to it, and call that your genre. And there is sort of an undeniable punch to that, isn't there? You can imagine the aesthetic of the world the story takes place in almost immediately. But then, at the same time, not really much else. You know in Steampunk there'll be plenty of anachronistic steam-powered technology. You know Cyberpunk will be full of advanced body modifications and smog-choked neon megacities. Even if you've never seen it before, you can probably at least guess that Splatterpunk is gonna be, messy. But what do all these writers and artists mean by attaching punk to these words? We can understand the first half pretty easily. The subject, the aesthetic, that registers right away. But what does punk do? Why add this appendage? Why genre punk and not just genre? Well, in order to answer that, we have to go back a bit. Back to the origin of punk itself. One of the best things in life is learning, which is probably why you're here to begin with. Unfortunately, a good education is ridiculously expensive, but it doesn't have to be. Learn all your fundamentals, maths, sciences, computer programming, and more with our sponsor, Brilliant. Visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry to get 30 days for free and 20% off a year's subscription. Seriously, this is the most fun you'll ever have learning this stuff. Try it out for free and be as brilliant as I know you can be. It's easy to jump to a conclusion when you hear someone call their work punk. At this point, we know what punk is intuitively, right? We've definitely been exposed to it enough. Well, you might be surprised how different it looks across all the different flavors of genre punk out there. Cyberpunk is pretty recognizable as punk in a general sense, right? Social outcasts, dystopian institutions, genre-busting sci-fi experimentation. But what about something like steampunk? I guess you often have your plucky band of rogues there, but then what's so punk about a world that just happens to be full of zany steam engines? And solarpunk? Most of the punk there actually illustrates a positive change in the world where renewable energy has altered things dramatically. Punk only in the sense that it defies real-world conventions. Afropunk is pretty similar in that it challenges the dominant social defaults and conventions, especially within the sphere of fiction writing. Splatterpunk is just, real grotesque and weird. Punk in that it doesn't give a f*** and it's proud. So, okay, obviously this is not a monolith. It's more of a diaspora, a starting place. People don't mean just one thing by punk. So if it's so nebulous, why use it? What does it mean? What can it possibly indicate about the work? The truth is that punk is actually a surprisingly powerful word all by itself. Yes, it conjures images of black leather jackets, angry teenagers, colored hair, and weirdly named hardcore bands like the Circle Jerks. But just like the machines of steampunk and the uber-gore of splatterpunk, those are only the things that live inside the genre. They don't actually describe it. Punk is a big word now, but it started small. Go far enough back and you find one of its first uses in Shakespeare. In the play Measure for Measure, the term punk is used in a few places to mean female prostitute. The history is a bit fuzzy after that, but with such a clear use case, it's not hard to imagine how conventional thinkers in the time between could see a word used in this way, grab hold of it, and transform it into a more generalized term for deviant, degenerate, undesirable, which is exactly what happened. In his article High Times Greats, one of the pioneers of the punk music genre, journalist Legs McNeil, describes how that very thinking is what made them want to adopt the term to describe themselves. They wanted to make a magazine that targeted the disaffected youth of the time and all those children at heart who see that the sanitized corporate conventionality of the society they occupy. When it came time to name the publication, he settled almost immediately on punk. "I had heard the word used for a quarter of a century on every cop show," he says. "After a grueling chase scene, they'd always tell the juvenile delinquent or young criminal what a punk he was and how he hurt his parents. 'You punk, look what you've done.' Everyone in America knew what a punk was. He was the bad guy, the unrelenting young prick who made his parents cry and didn't care. We intended to turn around the word, make it palatable, even acceptable. But no matter how hard we tried, punk would always be a 4-letter word. It was as if we had put out a magazine called F*** or C***. It frightened me that the policemen in the shows could use that word, but we couldn't." It was the perfect word for the moment. Its derogatory, unsavory nature made it exactly what the people in the scene were looking for. Adopting it was a way of saying, "Yeah, I know what you think of me, and I'm proud of it. Proud to disgust you and your conventions. Yeah, I'm a punk." A reclaimed word, not unlike the word queer, which was originally a slur, but is now a proud descriptor within the LGBTQ+ community. So, strip away the fashion, strip away the drugs, even strip away the defining music of the scene, and this is punk. The act of wearing your disaffection as a badge of honor, especially when it comes to the individual versus the institution. Okay, we have a working definition for punk. Fabulous. But what do people mean by attaching that to words like steam and splatter and afro and calling that their genre? Well, that started shortly after the term was popularized back in the 80s with the emergence of cyberpunk. We'll have to make a whole video on the history of cyberpunk as a genre sometime because it is very interesting, but I want to focus on that punk aspect here. This was a genre emerging on the heels of the new wave era of sci-fi. The golden age was in the rear view, the shining retro-futurist utopias long since abandoned for pithier, darker, more challenging landscapes. In the eyes of some writers, the future was metamorphosing from chrome spaceships to silicon and drugs. So, that's what they started to put into their fiction. High-tech, low-life, some called it. A more honest, cynical presaging of the world they saw to come. A genre that pulled no punches, looking at what was likely to happen on the world's current technological trajectory instead of just illustrating their shining, unblemished hopes for it, as so many writers had done before. William Gibson, perhaps the best-known author in the genre, gave it the first real jolt of electrochemistry that would send it careering off into the genre we know now with his beloved novel, Neuromancer. But it was actually another writer who coined the term. In 1983, Bruce Bethke published a story called Cyberpunk, which played in the same sandbox as Neuromancer. And why did Bethke choose this word? This adoption of the term punk? It was, by his own admission, his attempt to tap into the zeitgeist of the time, to target the disaffected youth of that generation, to marry the allure of emerging computer technology with the emerging discontent in the hearts of the kids. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? A lot like why Legs McNeil chose the term punk for his magazine in the first place. Despite the neon lights and fancy body modifications, cyberpunk was an ugly thing, full of visceral sex and violence, crumbling urban jungles and smog-choked skies. It was not pretty, it was not inviting, it was a middle finger to sanitized media. And perhaps, for all of these reasons, it was also incredibly resonant. Punk at its very core. Of course, the name stuck. And this convention, the appendage of punk, began to catch on. But there's a paradox in punk. When something adopted for the purpose of making a punk statement, "I'm glad you don't approve," becomes a convention, it sort of stops being punk? A gritty fashion statement, a novel package for your story, is not quite the same thing as a genuine pride that you aren't what the institutions around you expect you to be, is it? Steampunk as a genre is really interesting as well, and phew, we've been sleeping on making that video for almost half a decade now. But it's kind of hard to determine how exactly it is punk? What it means by that? Sure, the people who were writing it when it emerged were being sort of counterculture-y in that they were a bunch of weird Londonophiles writing anachronistic bizarro fiction about Victorian technology, but as far as I can tell, none of them were really doing it in spite of anybody. That wasn't part of the identity of the work. In fact, when he coined the term, author K.W. Jeter was just kind of being tongue-in-cheek, riffing on the term cyberpunk. I don't think he really meant to say that this gonzo historical fiction, as he called it, was punk at all. Actually, I think he summed up the ethos behind his usage of the term really well in an introduction to his own novel, Infernal Devices. The creation and promotion of literary genres and subgenres is nearly always a matter of self-promotion. Writers are essentially telling readers, "Hey, look at me. I'm doing something new and different. Not like those schlubs over there at the other end of the bookstore shelf who are just doing the same old thing." My coining back in 1987 of the word steampunk originally might have been more of a humorous jab at a tendency going around in those days of labeling any two genre writers with more in common than bipedal locomotion as the insert word here punk movement. So, unlike cyberpunk, which was unmistakably punk at its roots, steampunk just came from a need for a punchy term. And punk does have that punch, as Legs McNeil described. It will always be a four-letter word in its own way. I think this describes a lot of the newer genre punk categories. Steampunk, decopunk, dieselpunk, stonepunk, mythpunk, on and on, a descriptive word with hyphen punk attached to indicate to the world that this isn't like the other genres. It's not just sci-fi or fantasy, it's subversive and new. And, okay, I totally understand the desire to express that, but as we've established, that's not really what the word punk means. Don't mistake me here, this isn't about gatekeeping. I don't think any genre becomes better or worse just because it can or can't properly be considered punk, but calling a lot of these genres punk feels like a loss to me. Like it's missing the point of both the work in question and the word itself. If the beautiful thing about your work is that it isn't like others, then go, call it something unlike others. Gas lamp fantasy, diesel tech romance, prehistoric sci-fi. In these contexts, the punk appendage describes so little about the work itself, I genuinely believe you're better off without. I think, for the most part, a term like decopunk just gives an impression of false gravitas, leaves people scratching their head about what the word means beyond just involving Art Deco aesthetics and, I don't know, aggression? Characters who happen to be punks, maybe? On the other hand, there are examples of genre punk that pull no punches, where the punk comes through at full force and leaves you dazed with its passionate frustration. Afropunk makes so much sense as a punk genre because it speaks to a flawed and imbalanced institution and is happy to look like too much to the people who would take issue with it. Splatterpunk too, with all those Clive Barkers and Kath Kojas happy to be reviled for the amount of red they paint into the pages of their stories. Solarpunk is a revolt against the dystopian prophecies of its dark cousin Cyberpunk, unashamedly optimistic in a way that I'm sure many artists would consider naive. Punk is a powerful word with a powerful effect. If used properly, it can signal so much more than a little genre subversiveness. But, okay, what's done is done, right? Many of these terms are established. Steampunk has weight as a word, and that's hard to argue with. If it makes your work easier to find, I'm certainly not going to tell you not to use it, even if the punk element gets a bit lost. I think the most important thing in all of this is seeing through the haze of content to the power of this word that people have chosen to use for this purpose over and over again. Yes, punk in a colloquial sense can be a simple aesthetic. It can be a punchy word you attach to a noun to make sure people know that your work should be thought of as kind of different from the others. But it also has a pretty incredible history. This reclaimed piece of language that means such a specific thing? That identifies you as proud to be looked down on by the institutions you despise? What a use of four letters. For artists, some of the most introspective, divergent thinkers in the world, it seems like a pretty useful one. Of course, what it means to be an artist is sort of changing, isn't it? With the advent of AI-generated art, it's becoming harder and harder for us creatives to understand our place in the world. It's honestly a little scary. It can feel like the future of art is about to leave you behind. Which is why I've been so fascinated lately with our sponsor, Brilliant.org. For a robot, I'm not exactly what you would consider math or science-oriented. I spend all my time immersed in fiction, which is a fabulous education in its own way, but there is so much I've been missing out on. Brilliant has been helping me to broaden my horizons. I can always go to the site, click into a class, pick up where I left off, and take in a bite-sized piece of the fundamentals I've been missing. Whether it's math, science, physics, anything and everything STEM, Brilliant has something for you. This computer science course has really opened up a new world to me that I had almost no idea was there before. Slowly but surely, as I educate myself in this way, the AI revolution isn't looking quite so intimidating anymore. It doesn't even feel like studying either. A lot of what you do on Brilliant might be better classified as mini-games. Look how interactive and fun these are. This one even has robots. I won't lie, I've historically struggled a lot with my maths and sciences, which I think is something a lot of us creatives can relate to. But because Brilliant is so simple, moves at your pace, and starts with the very fundamentals, this is actually something that's really sticking for me. Almost like a personal tutor or coach. A legitimate, accessible, affordable, easy education, and a way to keep ahead of the changing landscape so you don't get left behind and miss out on all the new emerging ways to be creative. And the best part? You can start for free. Visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry or click the link in the description to get your first 30 days for free. And as if that weren't enough, the first 200 TaleFoundry fans to sign up for a yearly subscription to Brilliant will get a whole 20% off. Again, visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry to get your first 30 days for free and 20% off a year subscription. Don't let something as simple as a lack of education hold you back. Try this out and be as brilliant as I know that you can be. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!